In the heart of a meticulously manicured suburban neighborhood, the Homeowners Association, HOA, reigned supreme. The streets were lined with identical houses, each adorned with perfectly trimmed lawns and vibrant flower beds. It was a picture of tranquility, yet beneath this polished facade simmered an undercurrent of tension fueled by the HOA's stringent rules and regulations. Residents lived in both admiration and fear of the association, which dictated everything from paint colors to fence heights, maintaining an illusion of harmony at the expense of individuality. At the helm of this regime was Karen, an archetype of authority who embodied the HOA's overbearing spirit. With her sharp bob haircut and oversized sunglasses perched atop her head, even when it wasn't sunny, she navigated the neighborhood like a self-appointed queen surveying her domain. Karen was known for her unwavering commitment to upholding the rules, often taking it upon herself to patrol the streets in search of infractions. It was said that she could spot a weed peeking through a driveway crack from a mile away. Under her watchful eye, residents often felt like they were living under a microscope. The slightest infraction could lead to stern letters delivered in neatly folded envelopes or even fines that seemed exorbitant for minor offenses. A child's bicycle left on the lawn. A reprimand followed swiftly. A fence painted a shade too vibrant. Expect an immediate summons to appear before the board. Karen had perfected the art of wielding power, and many neighbors knew better than to challenge her authority. However, whispers began to circulate about discontent brewing among homeowners who felt suffocated by her reign. Secret gatherings started taking place in backyards, where frustrated residents exchanged stories about their encounters with Karen and plotted how they might reclaim their autonomy. They spoke in hushed tones about the possibility of confronting her. There was a sense of solidarity among them, a community slowly awakening from its slumber. Little did they know that soon enough, this simmering tension would boil over into an encounter that could change everything, a confrontation that would force Karen to face not just her neighbors but also her own vulnerabilities as she clung desperately to her fading power within the HOA's tightly woven fabric. Karen was not just a name in the neighborhood, she was a force to be reckoned with. As the president of the HOA, she wielded her authority like a sword, slicing through any semblance of dissent with surgical precision. Her personality was a mix of strictness and an unyielding need for control, making her both an enforcer and a symbol of the community's rigid standards. With a penchant for order, Karen took immense pride in her ability to keep every lawn perfectly manicured and every fence painted in approved colors. She saw herself as the guardian of suburban perfection, often boasting about how her vigilance maintained property values. Her physical presence matched her commanding demeanor. Always impeccably dressed in crisp blouses and tailored slacks, Karen sported her signature bob haircut, sharp enough to rival the clean lines of the houses she so meticulously regulated. Oversized sunglasses perched on her nose served as both a fashion statement and a shield against the scrutiny of her neighbors. She often moved through the neighborhood like a sentinel, clipboard in hand, ready to jot down any infractions she spotted during her patrols. Karen's history in the HOA was one of relentless enforcement. Over the years, she had mastered the art of instilling fear among residents, using a mix of intimidation tactics and bureaucratic jargon that left many feeling powerless. A mere violation, a flower pot set too far from the door or a flag displayed without prior approval, could result in stern warnings delivered with chilling efficiency. For some residents, it became easier to comply with her rules than to face her wrath. Despite her iron-fisted approach, there were faint murmurs of dissent swelling beneath the surface. While some feared confrontation, others began to secretly admire their neighbors who dared to challenge Karen's authority. As whispers circulated of her perceived tyranny, stories emerged of past attempts by residents to stand up to her, each story serving as both a cautionary tale and an inspiration. In private gatherings, community members shared their experiences with a mix of trepidation and newfound bravery. For many, confronting Karen was no longer about simply restoring their personal freedoms, it had become a mission to redefine their community and reclaim their right to individuality. Little did Karen know that the very power she had once wielded so effortlessly was beginning to slip through her fingers, setting the stage for a climactic clash that would unveil not only her vulnerabilities but also the strength of a united community ready to rise against her reign. The spark that ignited the simmering discontent in the neighborhood came on an otherwise ordinary Saturday morning. Mrs. Henderson, a kindly elderly resident known for her charming garden filled with vibrant tulips and daisies, was preparing for her annual yard sale. As she displayed her wares, old books, knickknacks, and handmade crafts, the familiar sound of Karen's clipboard tapping against her leg echoed through the street. Karen had been patrolling the neighborhood, her ever-watchful eyes scanning for any deviation from HOA regulations when she stumbled upon Mrs. Henderson's setup. With a sharp intake of breath, Karen approached, her expression a mix of disbelief and indignation. "Mrs. Henderson," she said, her voice dripping with authority, "you can't hold a yard sale without prior approval from the HOA board." Mrs. Henderson looked up, momentarily shocked at the unexpected confrontation. "But Karen, it's just a little sale. I'm trying to raise some funds for my community garden project," she replied with a shaky smile. However, Karen was undeterred by the sentiment behind the yard sale. Seizing the opportunity to enforce her power, she declared that Mrs. Henderson was in violation of HOA rules and issued her a formal warning that included hefty fines and potential disciplinary action if she continued with the sale. The severity of this punishment stunned not only Mrs. Henderson but also several neighbors who had gathered to browse through the items. Witnessing this interaction sparked outrage among residents who had quietly witnessed Karen's reign of terror for far too long. The once muted whispers transformed into fervent conversations as neighbors exchanged glances filled with determination. They could no longer stand idly by while their beloved community member was threatened over such a trivial matter. Fueled by empathy and anger, they began to gather on porches and in backyards to discuss their shared frustrations about Karen's excessive enforcement of rules that seemed designed more to instill fear than to maintain order. What began as one woman's attempt at community engagement had turned into a rallying cry against oppressive authority. That day marked a turning point. Residents vowed to confront Karen together, emboldened by their collective resolve to take back their neighborhood from her iron grip. The stage was now set for a reckoning that would not only challenge Karen's authority but also redefine what it meant to live in harmony within their community, a harmony rooted in understanding rather than fear. In the days that followed the confrontation between Karen and Mrs. Henderson, a palpable shift swept through the neighborhood. What had once been hushed conversations behind closed doors now erupted into boisterous gatherings filled with righteous indignation. Residents regularly convened in backyards and living rooms, fueled by a newfound camaraderie and purpose. Those who had previously felt isolated began to share their experiences, recounting similar run-ins with Karen and her oppressive tactics. Amidst the flicker of porch lights and the chatter of worried neighbors, feelings of anger morphed into solidarity. An agenda of unity emerged. Residents drafted an invitation for a town hall meeting meant to address not just their grievances against Karen but also larger questions about the HOA's grip on their lives. The discussions became increasingly animated as they envisioned a community liberated from fear, a place where they could express themselves without retaliation. On a stormy Tuesday evening, the much-anticipated gathering took place in the community center. The room was filled to capacity, with concerned homeowners spilling out into the hallway. Tension crackled in the air as familiar faces turned toward one another, each person brimming with emotions ranging from apprehension to defiance. They drafted an outline highlighting their core demands, most importantly, the need for a more transparent governance structure that would give residents a voice in decisions affecting their homes. As different individuals stood to express their frustrations, a recurring theme emerged. Karen's reign of terror had stifled creativity and autonomy within their once vibrant neighborhood. Some spoke about how their children, too afraid to play outside, felt confined by an oppressive atmosphere that cast shadows over childhood memories and laughter. A turning point came when Tom, a usually reserved father of three, spoke up with raw conviction. "We're not asking for chaos, we just want to feel like we belong." If she can violate our freedom under the guise of rules, what's stopping any of us from voicing our needs? His words set off waves of applause around the room, signaling a pivotal moment when collective courage overwhelmed individual fears. Fueled by this wave of momentum, residents rallied together to create a cohesive plan to confront Karen, one fortified by support rather than isolation. By openly discussing Karen's actions and demanding accountability from both her and the HOA, they laid down the groundwork for an impending showdown that promised to redefine not just their relationship with authority but also their identity as a community committed to fairness and understanding. The atmosphere buzzed with new resolve. They were ready to turn words into action. The day of reckoning arrived, marked on every resident's calendar with a collective determination. The community center was chosen as the battleground for this confrontation, its walls echoing with the voices of those who had felt silenced for too long. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawns, a crowd of disgruntled homeowners gathered outside, their expressions a mix of nerves and resolve. Inside, Karen sat at the head of the meeting table, her clipboard poised and her expression unreadable. She had been alerted to the gathering by concerned friends and was prepared to defend her unwavering stance on HOA regulations. Yet, there was an unfamiliar tension in the air. Today would not be like any other meeting she had presided over. As the residents filed in, each took their place with palpable energy rippling through the room. Tom, emboldened by the support of his neighbors, stood first to speak. "Karen," he began, his voice steady but firm, "we're here to discuss the way you've been treating members of our community. You've instilled fear under the guise of maintaining order." Karen's eyes narrowed slightly as she prepared to interrupt, but Tom pressed on. "This isn't just about Mrs. Henderson's yard sale, it's about how your actions have stifled us all. We can't live in fear of being punished for wanting to engage with one another." Applause erupted from the assembly as more residents joined in, sharing their experiences, stories of warnings issued for trivial offenses and how Karen's rigid approach had turned their vibrant neighborhood into a sterile environment devoid of warmth or community spirit. "I refuse to let my children grow up afraid to play outside," shouted Sarah, a mother who had remained quiet for far too long. "We want our neighborhood back. We want our voices heard." The mood shifted as Karen attempted to regain control, asserting that rules were there for a reason and insisting that her intention was only to protect property values. However, this time her words landed flat in a sea of dissenting murmurs and frustrated sighs. In a moment of collective courage, several residents stood simultaneously. "If you don't change your ways and start listening to us," another neighbor warned, "we will take action, bring this matter to higher authorities if necessary." The warning hung heavily in the air as Karen felt the walls begin to close in on her authority. For the first time, she could sense that her grip on power was slipping away, replaced by an overwhelming wave of unity among her neighbors determined to reclaim their autonomy. As she looked around at the faces filled with defiance rather than fear, panic began to creep into her mind. Today could very well mark the beginning of her downfall. As the confrontation escalated, Karen felt her carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. The confident demeanor she had relied upon, her shield against the world, was starting to slip away, replaced by a growing sense of panic that gnawed at her insides. Each shared grievance from the community resonated like a drumbeat in her ears, drowning out her attempts to assert control. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair as Tom's words echoed in her mind, "We can't live in fear." The sentiment hit home, and the realization that she had instilled more dread than respect roared back at her. Those who had once cowered at her presence were now standing united, fueled by a determination that she had underestimated. Their voices carried strength as they spoke of wanting their community back, a world where they felt safe and free, not oppressed by her rigid rules. A bead of sweat trickled down the back of her neck as she glanced around the room, taking in the faces filled with anger and defiance. These were neighbors she had known for years, people whose lives she had controlled through sheer willpower. Now, they were rallying against her, and it was a stark reminder that no power was absolute. "Please," Karen implored suddenly, her voice wavering as it cut through the chaos. I only wanted what was best for our neighborhood." The plea sounded weak even to her own ears, desperation tinged every word as she tried to regain some semblance of authority. Her usual sharp tone softened into something almost pleading, revealing vulnerabilities she had long hidden beneath layers of bravado. The murmurs of resistance fell silent for a moment as shock rippled through the room. Karen continued, speaking quickly as if trying to buy herself time. "If we could just have a discussion about these rules. I promise I never wanted to make anyone feel unsafe or unwelcome." Her eyes began to glisten with unshed tears, a sight both unexpected and uncomfortable for the crowd gathered before her. In that instant, Karen recognized how precarious her position truly was. The thought of losing control, the very thing that had defined her identity, terrified her. As she looked into the faces of those whom she had once lorded over, she felt small and exposed, unsure if there was any way to mend the rift that had formed. Fears rushed in. Would they see remorse or weakness? Would this moment be enough to salvage her reputation, or would it merely cement their resolve against her? "I can change," she stammered quietly, words escaping from lips trembling both with fear and hope, an admission of vulnerability that might hasten either forgiveness or rebellion. Regardless of their reaction, Karen knew one thing: she was no longer in control. In the aftermath of the confrontation, a remarkable transformation swept through the neighborhood. What had been a community marked by fear and isolation evolved into a tightly knit enclave of camaraderie and support. Residents who previously felt intimidated by Karen's authority began to connect with one another in ways they had never imagined, emboldened by their shared experiences and newfound hope. Gathering at each other's homes, they held informal meetings to discuss not only their grievances but also ideas for revitalizing their neighborhood. The energy was infectious as laughter mingled with serious discussions, creating an atmosphere where everyone felt included and valued. No longer did the sidewalk seem like pathways lined with silent strangers, instead, they buzzed with friendly greetings and encouraging nods among neighbors. Tom, having risen to a leadership role through his courageous stance during the confrontation, became a beacon of unity. He organized neighborhood potlucks, encouraging everyone to bring dishes that represented their heritage or favorite recipes. Each event became an opportunity to strengthen bonds over shared meals, fostering connections that crossed yard boundaries and broke down barriers built by years of fear. People shared stories around picnic tables, tales of picking apples during summer outings or fond memories of children playing side by side before the HOA rules took hold. The younger residents even started collaborations on art projects depicting their vision for a more harmonious living environment. With genuine support blooming all around them, anxiety about confronting Karen diminished. Empathy flourished as individuals took time to check in on one another. Neighbors now acknowledged the small daily struggles others faced. When Sarah organized a weekend gardening day for families, many stepped forward with tools and seedlings to help cultivate Mrs. Henderson's garden along with their own yards, collectively transforming patches of dirt into vibrant green spaces filled with laughter. As autumn rolled in, the community hosted its first Neighborhood Appreciation Day, welcoming everyone to celebrate both life's little victories and shared love for their homes. The event saw local musicians performing and children engaging in games that highlighted teamwork rather than competition. It symbolized not just rebirth from oppression but also hope rooted firmly in solidarity. Through these efforts, they embraced the notion that home isn't simply defined by property lines but rather by the connection among those who share it. United under a banner of renewal and collaboration, they quietly resolved that they would continue standing together on every issue that mattered, ready to defend one another in hopes of creating not just an HOA but truly thriving community, a place where fear no longer dictated how they lived or engaged with one another. In the aftermath of the decisive confrontation, the repercussions for Karen and the HOA began to unfold rapidly. Recognizing that her once invulnerable position had crumbled, Karen was forced to step down from her role as president, a decision made under pressure from not only the residents but also other members of the HOA board who had grown increasingly uncomfortable with her autocratic style. The moment was bittersweet, while she had exerted control for years, the loss of her position filled her with despair and confusion. Meanwhile, the community seized this opportunity to reshape their governance structure. A more democratic approach was established, inviting residents to actively participate in discussions and decision-making processes. They formed committees focused on communication, beautification projects, and social events, ensuring that every voice garnered attention. This new direction fostered a collaborative spirit among residents eager to redefine their neighborhood's identity. One of the first initiatives was a far-reaching review of existing HOA rules. Residents met in small groups to discuss which regulations felt restrictive and how they could evolve policies that still maintained order while promoting creativity and individuality. Through open dialogue, they collectively decided to loosen restrictions on personal expressions in their yards and gardens, allowing for a more diverse array of plants, decorations, and seasonal displays. They also introduced quarterly community forums where residents could bring their concerns directly to leadership without fear of reprisal. These gatherings emphasized transparency and encouraged even the quietest voices to speak out, reinforcing a sense of belonging among all participants. Feedback from these forums began shaping policy adjustments that reflected the desires of the majority rather than adhering strictly to outdated regulations. As Karen's influence waned and accountability became ingrained in community practices, former allies and demonstrators alike noted how their neighborhood felt rejuvenated. Social events flourished continuously, garden fairs celebrated local flora while cultural nights showcased different traditions through food and art, efforts that further cemented relationships among neighbors. Despite her absence from leadership roles, Karen's name remained mentioned in conversations shared amongst residents. However, it served more as a reminder than a threat. No longer did her shadow loom over their efforts, instead, it represented what they had overcome together. Embracing their newfound strength transformed not only the way they related with one another but also invigorated their community spirit, one where cooperation thrived over conflict, truly aligning with the vision they held for a united front moving forward. The confrontation with Karen served as a profound catalyst for change, prompting the neighborhood to reflect deeply on the dynamics of power and authority that had shaped their lives for so long. Previously, the HOA's rigid structure had fostered an environment of fear, where compliance was valued over individual expression, and dissent was met with reprimands. However, witnessing Karen's moment of vulnerability, her desperate pleas for understanding, allowed residents to see the fragility of her power. It illuminated a critical truth: authority is only as strong as the fear it instills. As neighbors discussed their experiences in the wake of the confrontation, they began to unpack what true community meant. They realized that authentic relationships are built on trust and mutual respect, not domination or control. The transformation from a culture of compliance to one of collaboration was not merely a change in governance, it became a powerful affirmation of individual rights and collective agency. Empowered by this newfound perspective, residents felt invigorated to challenge not just Karen's authority but also any future threats to their autonomy. They recognized that their strength lay not in conformity but in unity, a willingness to stand together against any individual or system that sought to undermine their voices. This realization shifted their approach to governance. They maintained vigilance and actively engaged in community discussions, ensuring that every opinion mattered and that decisions reflected the will of the majority. The aftermath of Karen's resignation prompted discussions about inclusivity and transparency in governance. Residents began drafting policies that emphasized open dialogue, allowing for a more democratic approach that prioritized shared values over rigid regulations. This shift marked a significant departure from the past, fostering resilience among neighbors who once felt powerless. In reflecting on their journey, many expressed gratitude for the lessons learned through adversity. The confrontation not only dismantled an oppressive regime but also forged bonds that made them stronger together. They transformed their neighborhood into one that celebrated diversity and embraced creativity, where every individual could express themselves freely within an atmosphere of support. Ultimately, Karen's downfall became more than just a personal defeat, it symbolized a collective awakening. The neighborhood emerged from this experience with a renewed commitment to protect their rights while fostering an environment where everyone could flourish. Armed with resilience and camaraderie, they were prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead, confident in their ability to navigate them as a united front, no longer mere subjects to authority, but active participants in shaping their community's future. As the dust settled from the upheaval, the neighborhood faced a pivotal moment that would shape its future. The transformation brought about by the confrontation with Karen not only altered the governance of the HOA but also challenged the very essence of community dynamics. Residents had learned that their voices mattered, and with this newfound realization came a commitment to maintaining their rights and fostering an environment of inclusivity. The implications for the HOA were profound. With Karen's departure, there was an opportunity for redemption, not just for her, but for the entire community. Many residents pondered whether Karen could find a way to reintegrate herself into this new landscape or if her time had truly passed. Some believed that if she took accountability for her past actions and demonstrated genuine remorse, she might earn a chance to contribute positively to the community, perhaps even as a volunteer or advisor in areas where her expertise could be beneficial. Others remained skeptical, cautioning that trust once broken is difficult to rebuild. Regardless of Karen's potential resurgence, the community had already set its sights on a brighter future. New leadership emerged organically from within, characterized by empathy and a commitment to open dialogue. The residents established regular meetings and workshops designed to ensure everyone had a say in decisions affecting their homes, reinforcing their belief that every individual contributed uniquely to their collective identity. With policies now rooted in collaboration rather than fear, residents embraced creative initiatives aimed at enhancing their shared spaces, community gardens flourished, art installations adorned common areas, and cultural celebrations became increasingly frequent. The neighborhood thrived on the diversity of its inhabitants, drawing strength from differing perspectives and experiences. Looking ahead, the residents recognized they would need to remain vigilant against complacency. They understood that while they had made significant strides toward creating a harmonious living environment, ongoing engagement was essential to sustaining this progress. The lessons learned from their collective struggle against oppression would be instrumental in shaping how they approached conflicts in the future. Ultimately, this experience solidified the notion that true authority lies not in rigid rules or one person's control but in mutual respect and cooperation among all community members. United by resilience and camaraderie, they stood ready to face future challenges together, aware that their strength resided not just in numbers but in their unwavering commitment to uphold each other's rights and well-being. This newfound understanding transformed not just their neighborhood but also instilled hope for what it meant to be part of a community where everyone could thrive freely and joyfully.